Hello, everybody, and welcome to PPG, Purpose, Passion, Grit. For those of you who are new to this or who've come from other sessions, and welcome to those of you I know from the book club. It's great to see you, and I hope that you will enjoy. This is a fairly new venture, as you know, for Goldster, doing PPG. So I'm just admitting a few people who are still coming in. And I just today like to welcome my guest, Sasha Bates, who is a psychotherapist, a grief counsellor, and has written 2 books, which we're going to talk about a little bit, as well as her other work. Here they are, Languages of Loss and a Grief Companion. So Sasha, welcome to Goldster. It's so lovely to have you on. And how are you today?
Yeah, good. Yeah, today's a good day. Yeah, sun's shining. I'm fine, thank you.
Oh, makes such a difference when the sun is shining. It really, really does. So you began your career as a filmmaker. Yes. So what made you decide to study psychotherapy and change your career so much?
Well, I had a lot of psychotherapy in my 20s and found it completely transformational. So I knew the power of it. And when I was, after 18 years in television, I was just thoroughly fed up and I wanted a break. And I was fascinated by psychotherapy, what made people tick, how relationships work, how the dynamics between us. It felt like one of the ways that you could kind of constantly talk about the big questions about why are we here and what are we doing. And so I just thought I would give it a go. When I started, I kind of thought, well, I'll just sort of do it for a couple of years and it'll be really interesting. And I didn't really ever think I'll become a psychotherapist, but every year of the training, I got more and more involved. And after 6 years, I thought, oh, I seem to have somehow become a psychotherapist. So yeah, it was partly wanting to get out of telly, partly wanting to get into a profession that I just found completely fascinating.
And have you continued to find it that fascinating? Do you find new things out all the time?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I mean, that's partly what I love about it, is that you can never get bored because there's always new people. There's always new things to think about, new ways of talking about things, new learning. So yeah, it's a constant voyage of discovery. So I love it. Yeah.
So tell us about what happened. Tell us about Bill's death and how you came to write your first book, Languages of Loss, because it's so tied up with your own grief counselling.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a general psychotherapist rather than a grief counsellor. I mean, a lot of people would come and see me because of grief issues, because loss in all its forms, whether it's actually losing a person or losing a sense of self or your future or a certainty, there's so many ways, or a job or a relationship, there's so many ways that loss pervades everything. So in a way, every psychotherapist confronts loss every day with every client. And I thought I knew a bit about it. I thought, I've studied it, I've been on the courses, I've read the books, I know the theories. But then when my husband died, which was completely out of the blue, and I was plunged into grief myself, I realized that actually nothing prepares you. All the reading and the studying and the learning in the world doesn't actually tell you what it feels like. And Bill's death just was such a shock and just completely upset my entire world. Obviously, I went from being happily married with a whole future plan to suddenly nothing that I thought was true anymore. And it was really that kind of sense of disorientation and the overwhelming emotions that I didn't understand and hadn't been prepared for that made me start writing. Because when I first started writing, I didn't think, oh, this is going to be a book. It was just my way of kind of getting my emotions out. And I think because I'd written scripts for documentaries for 18 years, writing was my sort of one of my modus operandi. So it just came naturally to me to try and make sense of what I was going through. So it was really just a journal. And actually, as I've now come to learn from spending quite, 4 years studying grief even more deeply, journaling is actually a very proven and helpful method of managing grief. But I just did it instinctively. I just knew that was something that I needed to do to kind of get my feelings out, really. And then my emotions were just sort of coming out pretty much unmediated onto the page. But gradually, after a few weeks, I noticed that my therapist self was sort of entering the conversation more, that as I was kind of spewing out all this kind of pain and rawness, I would then find myself saying things like, oh, okay, so this is what they mean by anger, and this is what they mean by shock, and I could see that it was almost like my therapist self was like guiding my grieving self through it. So it became very much like two personalities writing side by side. And that went on for a few months, and then I just kind of thought, maybe this could help other people. Maybe if this is helping me and it's making me reflect not just on the different grief theories, of which there are many, although most people think there's only one, but also just on everything I'd learned throughout my training, all the different approaches to psychotherapy, all that we know about who we are and how we respond to things, all of that was feeding in. So I was looking at all the various approaches that I might use with clients and thinking, well, what is helpful at this particular time? So yeah, I just thought maybe this could help other people as well, which, you know, I was amazed and delighted to see that it has done. But initially it was just, you know, I did it for myself.
And so did you find you were really kind of almost becoming two people? You were being the therapist, helping your other self through it? Because that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, one of the sort of approaches to being a therapist that sits very naturally with me, that really resonates, is this notion of multiple personalities, where we are all different selves and each one sort of has a different role to play. So I had always kind of thought of myself in that way, of like who's kind of taking center stage at the moment. So it felt quite natural to me to think, okay, so this is my grieving self, this is my angry self, this is my sort of grown-up therapist, more cognitive, more kind of rational self. So yeah, I was able to tap into who was kind of, as I say, taking center stage at any point, and say, okay, what do you want to say? This is your moment. You have full voice.
Yeah, I find it so wonderful that you were able to use what you'd learned from other people to help yourself, but then to move it on in your own practice. So you were already working as a grief counsellor before you were widowed, and you were widowed very young. You were in your 40s, weren't you? When you were widowed.
Yeah.
How did you find that your practice as a grief counsellor changed after Bill's death? And if so, how did it change?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I say, I wasn't a grief counsellor. I was a general psychotherapist, so I saw a lot of people who were grieving, but that wasn't my speciality. When Bill died, I actually stopped working as a therapist for 2 years. I just didn't feel able. I wasn't. You have to be grounded and centered and able to take care of yourself in order to be a therapist, and I didn't feel like I was any of those things, and I knew I just had to kind of be with my grief. And then as I started writing the book, or when it became apparent that it was going to be a book, I wanted to devote myself to that. So I stopped working as a therapist for the first 2 years, and then I went back. So that was 2 years, 4.5 years since Bill died. So I've been back working as a therapist alongside writing. I've carried on writing other books as well, 2.5 years ago. And I would say I definitely practice slightly differently. I limit how many bereaved people I take on. I make sure that I don't have any more than 3 clients who are coming specifically for bereavement, because it's too much for me. I find it, you know, too triggering. I can manage so much. I don't want to spend all day talking about bereavement. So I'm very strict in how many bereaved clients I will have as part of my client base. But I think with those clients, I do work slightly differently. Maybe not so much with the others, but with the bereaved people, I think I'm a lot more myself. Most of them have come to me because they've read the book or they've heard me, you know, talk somewhere. So you don't have quite so much separation as you would with a normal psychotherapy client, where you try not to give too much of yourself away. But I think with the bereaved, you know, it is, you know, it's a club that nobody really wants to belong to, but once you're in it, you know, it does feel very much like us and them. Like I say, I'd studied grief as part of my training beforehand and thought I knew about it, but until you've gone through it, you just don't know what it really feels like. So I think there's definitely more of a kinship and you know, we're part of the same tribe with the bereaved clients that I see. So yeah, I would say I'm a bit more open. They know that I know what they're going through, to a certain extent. You can never, everybody's grief is different, but they know that I'm not just talking from theory, I'm talking from experience. So I'm a bit more open, a bit more myself, and I just think I get it a bit more with the bereaved clients that I now have.
Yeah. And that must be really good, particularly if they've read your book and they know what you've been through. And I know, and I've experienced it as well, and you mentioned it in your book, that we almost seem programmed not to talk about a deceased person. People are always terrified to mention the name of someone who's died. And when you say it yourself, people always look a bit shocked, like, oh, are we allowed to talk about this? Why do you think that is? What keeps us from mentioning those who've died to the people who've been bereaved, or not wanting to talk about death at all? I mean, we're so divorced from death. I mean, I research the Victorians, they're surrounded by death all the time. And yet in this age, we're really divorced from it. What do you think's happened, and what do you think needs to change back, or doesn't it?
Yeah, so no, definitely does. I mean, I think so much needs to change, and it's possible that maybe COVID has been our friend in this way, in that more people are bereaved, more people have spent the last 2 years reassessing and having to change how they are in so many ways. Oh, I think it's so many things. I think it's part of this, mad British stiff upper lip idea, this sort of sense of British embarrassment, this sort of notion that, if we don't talk about it, then we can pretend it hasn't happened. And I mean, so many people say, oh, I didn't want to upset you, as though them talking about Bill or about death is the thing that's going to be upset. So, well, him dying is what has upset me. You talking about it is just giving an outlet to some of that upset. But I think people are just terrified for several reasons. I think part of it is cultural. I think part of it makes them face their own mortality. And again, they think, well, if I don't talk about it, it won't happen. And, let's just keep all the nasty stuff at bay. Why ruin things? Partly their own fear of how they would cope if they lost a loved one. Again, they just don't want to go near the thought of their own death or the death of someone close to them. So I think ultimately it comes down to British embarrassment and fear, and I get both of those things, and I completely understand it. But just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean, it's like the monster under the bed. It's actually, if you kind of peek under there, it's a lot less frightening than what your imagination is going to tell you is under there if you don't look at it.
And how do you think we could start changing this? I mean, what would you say to anybody listening today who knows somebody who's been bereaved and they don't know how to deal with their friend or their partner's grief?
I think it's very hard. I think being with a bereaved person is really, really hard. So don't underestimate that. Of course, you're going to feel scared. Of course, you're not going to want to upset them further. But by asking them, being alongside them is the first thing. Just say, I'm here for you in whatever way you need me to be, and follow their lead. So just ask them, is it okay to talk about him, her, them, it, whatever. And most people, I think, would probably appreciate being given that option, because, I always talk about it from the perspective of somebody who wants to talk about Bill and who, as a therapist, believes it's kind of healthy to. But there are going to be some people that really don't want to, and you've got to respect that. So don't go barreling in, but just say, is it okay? Can we talk about this? So I would follow rather than lead, but just tentatively say. I mean, I personally, I kind of try and mention Bill's name early on in a conversation as a way of sort of giving permission, and you can see people almost visibly relaxing that, oh, it's okay, we can acknowledge that he was a person and that he did die. So I would just ask people, is it okay? I mean, for me, again, and many people have said similarly, but as I say, it's individual, so not everybody's going to think this. But for me, I love people telling me their stories about Bill, their memories of him, asking about them. What was he like? So yeah, I just ask, just ask, is this okay? Can I mention his name, her name, their name?
Brilliant advice, thank you. And for all of you watching as well, by the way, if anybody wants to put any questions or comments in the chat, please do so, and I will ask Sasha. In fact, we've got a comment already. Well done. As if by magic. My family and friends always talk about my late husband. It keeps his memory very much alive. Thank you very much for that, Jean. Could you tell us about Bill, Sasha? And then could you tell us about his death? Because it was very sudden. And for those who haven't read the book, I'd like them to understand what you went through.
Yeah, Bill was, he was many things. He was a polymath. He had been an actor in his 20s. By the time he was 30, he realized that wasn't really going to be his calling in life. So he set up what became a very successful business, which he then ran for 25 years, which was teaching people communication skills, people in the corporate world. But alongside that business, he continued writing plays, directing plays, just small things for like little festivals, not, you know, big West End things, but just something to keep his love of theatre going. He'd written a couple of one-man plays that he performed in, again, in smaller venues around the country. So he kept his sort of love of theatre going. He also would go to the theatre like once or twice a week, twice a day sometimes on a Saturday. He absolutely adored theatre. He was an incredibly funny man. He was also a writer. I mean, he wrote plays, but he also did travel journalism and other types of journalism. So he was interested and curious in everything and everyone. And he was hysterically funny. He had a very dry, observant sense of humour. So he was really, you know, well liked. He had lots of friends, sociable, quite an introverted person, but also a sociable introvert. Healthy, sort of non-meat eater, Quaker, marathon runner, didn't smoke, didn't drink very often, although he did like the odd beer occasionally. And yeah, incredibly healthy. And we had a whole, you know, future plans of travel and excitement. And then one day when he was 56, he suddenly clutched his chest. Long story short, there was a lot of investigations over that same day. Turns out that he had what was called an aortic dissection, which is where your aorta just spontaneously splits, which means that all the blood that it contains, the aorta is the biggest vein in the body, so that all that blood kind of runs amok, really. So he had heart surgery that day. They said it had gone well. They said that they'd kind of contained everything, but the following day, when they were meant to be bringing him back round, he had a massive stroke. It turns out that when the blood had escaped from his aorta, even though they'd mended it, some blood had travelled up to an artery up here and was slowly starving his brain of oxygen. So by the second day, he kind of clutched his heart and had the dissection on the Sunday. By the Monday night, they told me he wasn't going to survive. So it was really, really quick. And like I say, he'd been fit and healthy, and then been absolutely no indication beyond, you know, this sudden, oh my God, something's going on here that I don't understand. He was then in a coma for 3 days. We knew there was no chance of him surviving, but we had various complications that you have to wait for a doctor to be able to pronounce him dead. We had to wait for the drugs to leave the system and various things. So Sunday he collapsed. Monday I was told he wasn't going to survive. Thursday he was pronounced officially dead. So yeah, it was, as you can imagine, pretty much the worst 5 days of my life. It was horrific, and just literally came out of the blue. And I went from being perfectly happily married person with a future to suddenly completely devastated. So yeah, it was pretty life changing. Well, life ending for him, life changing for me.
One of the things really struck me about your book is how infuriated I was with the cuts to the NHS. And I don't know whether it could have made any difference if the first hospital he went to had the right equipment, if he hadn't had to keep being shipped around. I don't know, obviously, but I was so infuriated that as a non-medical person, you know, to not know about this until it's too late, that actually the nearest hospital to you, which is a 5-minute drive away, had been turned into basically a glorified GP's practice. And this is a hospital that used to be world famous, it used to be groundbreaking in terms of cardiology, didn't it? And how on earth that has happened. And as a nation, we're just not really aware of it until it's too late in Bill's case.
No, I mean, it's horrific. I mean, I tried not to get too political in the book. I mean, the earlier versions, there was a lot of ranting about the fact that he could have been saved. My editor probably rightly toned it down, and said it's not that kind of a book, so I didn't dwell on it. But yeah, I mean, we live equidistant between Hammersmith Hospital and Charing Cross Hospital, and in that moment when, like I say, he sort of clutched his heart and went, something's going on here, I just didn't know in that moment which hospital I meant to go to. Yeah, I mean, clearly I went to Hammersmith, which has got a great cardiology department, but it took the GP that was on call. It no longer had an A&E department, which I wasn't aware of. So that when we got there, the GP on call, it was just basically a GP surgery, didn't know what to do. We wasted a couple of hours while she kind of faffed around wondering what to do, ended up calling an ambulance from a hospital to take us down to Charing Cross Hospital, where they had an MRI scanner where they diagnosed the aortic dissection, realised that they needed heart surgery, and we then had to go back to Hammersmith Hospital in order for him to have the heart surgery. So we basically wasted hours and hours and hours, had, you know, these two specialisms not been kind of separated, the MRI in one place, the A&E and MRI in one place. Having had the cardiology, the heart surgery, the next day when it became apparent that this clot was starving his brain, the brain surgery bit was back at Charing Cross. So he was, at this stage, he was too ill to move. So he couldn't go back to Charing Cross, where they had separated out the brain surgery bit. And it was only late that night when they realized he's dying, we have one last thing that we can try, so we may as well, you know, risk moving him. But he then went back to Charing Cross, by which time it was too late. They couldn't do the thing that they thought was going to help relieve the pressure on his brain. So yeah, I mean, the fact that they separated out these two specialities, brain and MRI in one place and heart in another, and I mean, who knows if he would have survived, but, you know, that was 24 hours of faffing about and endless toing and froing in an ambulance with a very, very sick man, which, yeah, I try not to dwell on it too much, because that way lies madness. But yeah, I obviously am very aware of how different things could have been had hospital, well, Tory cuts, let's not beat about the bush, not destroyed two fully functioning hospitals and divided them up. But yeah,
it's absolutely shocking. I remember being on a demonstration once when they were proposing a lot of these cuts to the NHS, and it was just outside the Hammersmith Hospital actually, and I met this lovely woman, and she said to me that she was so frustrated. She was a health worker, and she had been at a council meeting where they were making decisions. And there was a doctor there who was a member of the local government, and he was saying, well, it's only 5 miles between this A&E, and they were cutting out all the other A&Es. He said, I mean, for goodness sake, I could walk 5 miles. And she just raised her hand and said, excuse me, doctor, could you walk 5 miles with a broken leg? And he couldn't answer her.
Yeah, or in the midst of a heart attack, or in the midst of an aortic dissection. It's ridiculous, yeah.
Exactly. And they closed down. They said, well, you know, it's only 2 miles away between Charing Cross or whatever and Hammersmith. But of course, 2 miles in London traffic, it can take hours, as anybody who lives in a city knows. And when I read it, that was the thing that really got to me. I thought, this is what shouldn't happen. This is what everybody needs to know about, you know, really just is so heartbreaking. And I felt for you so much. But having said this book, I mean, I don't want you to think it's all just crying, because I was also laughing at it, which is amazing. And you say that, you know, you are, you know, Bill had a great sense of humor, and you wanted to be able to laugh when, you know, at the end of his life, when you were there with your friends or whatever. Hello, cat. And
meowing, it's the only way to stop a meowing.
Well, that's a good form of therapy in itself.
Yeah, absolutely the best.
I do recommend this. I really do, for not only for yourself if you're experiencing grief, but I think a great thing to buy for somebody else who's going through it, because it gives you ideas of how you can help friends or family members going through grief. So let us move on to your other book, A Grief Companion. So what made you decide, you'd written this one, and this is very much your very personal journey. What made you decide to write this one? And do you want to tell us what people can learn from this and how to use it? Because this says practical support and a guiding hand through the darkness of loss.
Yeah, well, I mean, Languages of Loss is very much my personal journey, and it is, you know, I have been told it's quite heartrending and can be hard to read, even though, like I say, I tried, but it was so funny that I couldn't write a book that wasn't, you know, also funny where I could make it funny. I mean, it's hard to put too much humor into a book about your husband dying unexpectedly, but, you know, I let his humor come through where I could. So it's partly that, but it's also partly, like I said, there's an exploration of, it's almost like a bit of a history of different therapeutic approaches over the years, from Freud through body psychotherapy, through existential therapy, through various attachment theory, various different types of theory. So it's quite, alongside my own story, it's quite theoretical, and I mean academic, but, you know, for the non-academic. What people often said to me, having read it, was they said, oh, I really like the bit where you told people how to help a grieving friend, which is a very, very small part and a bit anomalous, really. It didn't really fit into either of those two halves that I was just describing. But so many people said, oh, that was so helpful to know how to kind of, from a grieving person's perspective, what you need from your friends. So I've been talking to my publishers. They'd already said, well, what about something that's a bit more practical, not just for grievers and for their friends? So it's actually, you know, advice and suggestions and a little bit of sort of psychoeducation of, you might be feeling this and this might be why, which of course as a therapist you don't give advice or opinions. So we'd already been kind of playing with that idea of doing a book like that. And then COVID hit, and suddenly we were all grieving in one form or another. We were all grieving for the lives that we were kind of losing, for the futures that we thought we had, and the certainties, and you know, the parties not gone to, and, you know, a million other things, not to mention all the extra deaths. So it just felt like the natural thing to do. There was more demands, that this is what people were saying, we want more of this. So I wrote it throughout the first couple of lockdowns, I think, just a more practical, suggestion-led, you know, if you're feeling like this, you might want to think about doing that, rather than this is what you must do. Just, you know, these are a whole collection, a whole book's worth of things that I have found helpful, or that other people have found helpful, or that the research says might be helpful. So it's not didactic. It's not telling you must do any of these things, or that any of these things will definitely help you. But at certain times it might help, bits of it might help some people. So yeah, just a bit more kind of hand-holding really through those awful, particularly, I mean, it's hopefully useful throughout, but particularly those awful first few months where you're still just like reeling from the shock, and adjusting to life without your person.
Well, I was reading it, I was really struck by how many of your suggestions, and I'm not a therapist, it just seemed to me that it could equally well apply to people suffering from depression. As a therapist, do you think this would be helpful?
Yeah, it absolutely would be, yes. I mean, depression can be one of the many symptoms of grief, and I think depression, even without grief, is often, like I said early on, a lot of the things that people come to therapy about, they might not even know that loss is underpinning it, but loss is underpinning a lot of the presentations we see. It might look like addiction or anxiety or depression, but actually loss is a big component, particularly of depression. So I think it's a sort of a bit of a, you know, mental health guide 101 for almost anything really, but using grief as the primary kind of motivator. But yeah, loss underpins a lot of depression, and depression underpins a lot of loss. So all the suggestions should hopefully have something for somebody in there.
Yeah. So what have the responses been to the grief companion and to languages of loss? Have you had some kind of surprising things? Have you been contacted by people you didn't expect to be contacted by?
Oh, do you know, it's been amazing. I mean, like I said, I initially wrote the first one for me. It was only sort of gradually dawned on me that it might help others. But even then, I had no idea of how much people would get from it. And I've had, I mean, it's been out 2 years now, and I've had over that time, and even funnily enough, even this morning, I had, you know, still people will send me letters or emails or Instagram messages saying, oh, this book really resonates and it's helping me through, and you're expressing something that I couldn't express. And so it's really wonderful to feel part of that community, that people are kind of getting something from it. I think Grief Companion, the emails I get about that are more because it's more of a factual book. It's not my story. I get more factual responses. So, oh yeah, no, this is useful, thank you. And yes, I passed this on to my friends, and she was really like. So they're less emotive, the emails I get about Grief Companion. But yeah, I mean, I've been absolutely kind of gobsmacked and blown away by the way how many people have got in touch about both of them and found them useful. I mean, it's such a incredible subsidiary, sort of gain. And I do talk in both books about, of course, feel the pain, let it out, acknowledge all the losses, but also try and acknowledge what you gain as well, given that, of course, nobody wants to lose anybody, and given that it is horrific, we can't change it. So you may as well find what, shreds of positivity can come out of it. I mean, I call them gems amongst the rubble. Don't ignore the rubble. The rubble is there and it cuts your feet and it's painful and awful, but you will find gems amongst it. And one of my gems has been this incredible community and connection with so many grieving people, and to know that you're not alone, to know that other people are going through it, and that we have survived and we will survive, and we share the pain and we share the kind of the joys. So yeah, it's definitely been one of my gems that's come out of the rubble for me, is knowing how many people I'm now in contact with through the books.
You talk about journaling in both books, actually,
yeah.
And that's quite interesting to me, because I just a few weeks ago, a friend of mine died last year very unexpectedly, and I had been thinking just a few weeks ago, I think I'm going to write a book for me, not a book to be published, almost like a scrapbook, where I'm just going to write all my memories. She and I traveled together for a year. We went backpacking around the world, and all of the different memories. And then I came across it in your book, and I thought, oh wow, so this is a practice. And I was fascinated to see that you say they've done studies on it at Harvard. Tell us a little bit about keeping a journal and how that can really help.
Oh, well, it's, I mean, first and foremost, it's getting what's inside out. And it's connecting with the right brain. There's a lot of really interesting neuroscientific research looking at both hemispheres of the brain and how they each function slightly differently, in tandem, obviously, but the right brain is often very neglected, both in our society and just in the way that we live, because we're so kind of channeled into be logical, be rational, be verbal, and we don't prioritize the more artistic, the more ineffable, the less graspable way that the right brain functions. So journaling, if you start by, don't even think about what you're doing, don't engage with the left brain, just write, just kind of tell yourself for 10 minutes, I'm not going to pick the pen up off the paper, I'm not going to think about what I'm writing, I'm just going to write and see what comes. That's a very direct way to get the right brain moving and functioning. Any sort of creativity is actually the art, music, anything that's not like I say, kind of goal driven, but is more free ranging. And the right brain is often the thing where we're functioning from in grief, because it's better at processing the more complicated emotions. It's more emotional, to be honest. So in grief, we're sort of plunged into a more right brain way of being and thinking. So to kind of harness that and use the creativity. In fact, I have a workshop that is called Grief as a Crucible for Creativity. It's why we're often more open to things like music and art and poetry and the transcendental and the more spiritual and those more ineffable, unpin downable kind of things, because we're plunged into that right brain processing of emotions, as opposed to the right, I'm just going to kind of be on one path. So journaling kind of taps into that and gives this an outlet, and it's, you know, it gives us a way of being more expressive. It's also about storytelling, and I think when somebody dies, like you said, you naturally felt drawn to telling the stories of you and your friends, and it keeps you feeling closer to somebody, it keeps their memory alive. It's storytelling goes back, you know, way beyond, way earlier than, you know, the original kind of Freud and his psychoanalytic way of kind of like getting to our stories. You know, storytelling's, you know, from time immemorial, we've sat around the campfire telling stories, and it's a way of keeping people alive, a way of kind of understanding who we are. It's a way of communing with other people, of sharing, of feeling that kind of common humanity. So storytelling and journaling, on both from like there's neuroscientific research, there's kind of you know, indigenous Native American research. I mean, there's all sorts of research from all sorts of different disciplines that is telling us that it's a really helpful way to process emotions.
It's fascinating. And I suppose because as well, when the story is shared between the two of you, once one of you's gone, you're the only kind of harbinger. You are the person who knows about them. And if you don't tell anybody else, then those stories could be lost forever. And I guess maybe that's another reason for telling these stories. It's a bit like when people do genealogy, they want people to know about their ancestors. Perhaps when someone dies, we need those stories to be kept alive, as you say.
Yeah, and it's also about making connections both with others in the kind of the sharing of them, but also you make connections yourself, which is again sort of what psychotherapy is. It's a way of telling your story and being heard by another person and putting two and two together and connecting. Oh, I felt like this before, and I can see the familiarity, and I can follow that line. I mean, coming from being a documentary filmmaker, it's not actually a huge leap to being a psychotherapist, because it's a similar thing of wanting to unearth and investigate and get to the bottom of, well, how did we get to this point, by tracing back and understanding all the different things that have led up to where we are now. So in documentary filmmaking, you're doing it with a very different motivation, but actually it's not that dissimilar. It's about excavating, it's archaeology or investigative journalism on your own personality, of understanding, oh, that's why I'm endlessly doing that same thing, or that's why I feel like this, and this is why this is so painful, and this is why I do this so often. So it's making connections within your own self as well, within your own psyche, your own stories, but also connecting body and mind and emotions, and not kind of siloing them off into kind of separate things.
And have you thought about, you've been tempted to do a kind of TV documentary about grief, to share the information that's in your book?
Yeah, I did have quite a lot of discussions actually with the BBC at the same time I was writing the book, because the book initially, like I said, it was just journaling. It was just me. You know, I kind of thought, well, if I'm going to do something with this, I'm going to make a film, because that was sort of going, I'm more of a filmmaker than I am a writer, even though I've written the scripts for my film. So I see things in images, and oh, I can't tell you. I mean, the commissioning process is just torturous. I mean, I had a year of discussions with the BBC about various permutations of how we could do a documentary about grief, and it went from being a three-parter to a one-off to a this, to that. I mean, I rewrote this damn proposal about 16 times. And in the end, I kind of said, do you know what? I've written a whole book in the time it's taken us to endlessly, you know, reinvent the wheel. And I'm just not sure this went from being a way of me healing myself, or, you know, managing my grief, to being something that's more painful, because I just can't stand having another conversation and rewriting the proposal in yet another iteration. So I walked away from it. But yeah, I had lots of ideas about how to get it on the screen, but sadly didn't line up with anybody that had the money to make it.
I do know that feeling so well. Those great ideas that never come to fruition. Maybe one day. So we've had a few comments here, a couple about Bill's death and the hospitals. One says, shocking. My husband's experience was much more caring and professional. Glad to hear that. And Emma says, what a sad thing to have happened to your family. But since the publication of your book, have the two hospitals been made aware of the inconveniences their separation causes patients, especially regarding what happened to your dear husband?
No, I mean, I don't think, I mean, I suppose I could, I don't even know who I would write to, but I think even if I were to write, I mean, I suppose I could write to my local MP. It's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. You know, we've campaigned, we've protested, we've tried to vote at the ballot box to, you know, we're completely powerless. You know, if people keep voting in a government that wants to cut resources in the name of efficiency, you know, one person, sorry, you know, I'm one of, I'm sure, millions of people that have something similar to say. If I thought it would do any good, but you know, it cost them millions of pounds separating them out, there's no way they're ever going to put them back just because of one person's bad experience. You know, we're lumbered with an underfunded NHS, and it's only going to get worse. So yeah, I mean, I would love to think that me going and knocking on a few doors or writing a few angry letters would change something, but I know it won't. And like I say, I try not to dwell on it too much, because you know, grief is hard enough, and I'm angry enough most of the time. Kind of fueling that anger, I don't think is helpful for me. I would love it, you know, if other people could turn their anger into something, you know, useful. For me, that's not my path. Many people are fantastically, you know, they do turn their anger, and the anger is definitely a part of grief. You know, if you think of somebody like I don't know her title, I think she's Dame Doreen Lawrence, MBE or something. I mean, I think she's got a million different titles, and quite rightly so. She turned her anger over Stephen Lawrence's death into, you know, she's reformed to a certain extent, limited, the police force. There's been grieving mothers who, I think there was a law, wasn't there, a few years ago called Sarah's Law, where grieving mother, her childhood, I can't remember the details, and she campaigned something, I think it was something to do with sex offenders.
Sarah Payne's mother, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, a lot of people do turn their anger into something really, really positive. I took my grief into writing books and into doing talks and into my therapy practice, and I think, you know, everybody has to find their way of channeling their grief and their pain, and that was mine. So no, I'm not going to campaign or follow that up, but I would, you know, obviously I would, you can tell from the way I talk, I would love it if it were different. But that's not my
well
part.
If anybody out there has, and who's watching this, has got any influence or any ideas, please do try. So Caroline, who's actually a friend of mine, has written the power of journaling is interesting to me, as I'm part of a life writing group, and the history of loss has been a prime trigger in our work. Lucinda has worked with the group. I've helped them with writing workshops, and they're amazing. The idea of right brain, left brain is a fascinating insight into what is happening to us. And it's a really interesting way of looking at it. I thought the same thing about the idea of the two parts of the brain. I hadn't really thought of that before. So apart from writing a journal, what would be your most important tips for anyone struggling with grief, kind of thinking about the grief companion? What could you suggest to people here to do?
Oh, I'm always asked this. And I find it so hard, because there is no one thing. And in fact, Grief Companion is divided into mind, body, spirit, and sort of practical. I think the title's every day, but it's basically the practical, because there are so many different parts of us that we have to kind of nurture and care for. So I suppose nurture and care for and self-compassion is huge. Give yourself permission to just be with whatever you need to be at the time. Grief is this horrible shapeshifter, and there will be days when you want to just go out and forget about it and get drunk and do retail therapy and see your mates and just pretend that you're not grieving. Go with it. There will be other days when you just literally can't get out of bed and you need to kind of like pull the duvet over and cry solidly for a day. Go with that if that's where you are. I would say tune in to what you need each day and honor that, and don't try and push yourself into being the sort of griever that you feel you ought to be, or that you think other people are expecting you to be. So self-compassion, getting it out, whether that's journaling. A lot of people won't feel comfortable writing. You can write it in the form of a letter, you can do voice notes, you can make little films, you can do a video diary, you can do art. Art therapy is fantastically helpful. You can make music, you can do your garden. There's so much research on gardening, walks in nature, swimming, movement, yoga. I mean, there are so many different ways that are helpful. Connecting with others, having therapy. I mean, there's a whole book full of things that you can do, but the primary one is just take care of yourself. Get good friends around you, warn them that you will be unpredictable, that your moods will swing left, right and center, that, you know, just because today you said that you felt that you wanted to do this, actually you're not going to be able to do that, because today's actually a day when you're a puddle on the floor. So have people that you know will just be okay with that. They'll say, yeah, if you don't want to talk, I'll just sit here with you and I'll read my book in the corner, but I'm here with you. If you just want to be on your own, I will leave you on your own. If you want to talk, if you want me to talk. So get your friends on board with the fact that you are, as I describe it in my book, that you are no longer a functioning adult. You are an unruly toddler who can't manage their own emotions, because often it will feel like that, not always. And of course there will be times when you just think, right, enough, I need to read the books, I need to think about this, I need to remember that I am an adult. But there will be other days when it's like, I just feel like a toddler who just needs to weep and wail and stamp my feet and scream and shout, and that's just what I need to do today. I need to let the toddler kind of rampage, and hope that the adult will come back online at some point, you know, when she's able. And you know, this isn't, we're not talking, you know, in just in the first few days. I'm 4.5 years in and I still have days when I just kind of go completely I won't swear, crazy, let's just say that. Either through rage or tears or randomness. It's random. The feelings are random and they're overwhelming and they can sideswipe you and they're going to keep coming. I don't believe you ever get over grief. You just learn to live with it a bit better. Yeah.
We have a lovely comment here. So sorry for your loss, Sasha. I believe we check out the person we're talking to and, as you say, see how they feel. Most times I think people want to talk but don't know what to say. Sometimes it's just a touch they need. I think once you start talking about them, everyone, as you say, is different. I think on the whole, it's good to talk about the person or just hug someone. Absolutely. I mean, we all miss that so much in lockdown. Remembering them in funny things they did is great too. We carry them with us forever. I hope everyone listening gets something from this. Thank you, Sasha. And then another comment, one of my friends complained to my daughter that I wasn't grieving in the way she thought I should. Yeah. I bet you hear that all the time.
Yeah. Oh, I do. And I write a whole passage in Languages of Loss, actually, about how I sometimes felt that I was, you know, in some sort of terrifying improvisational comedy thing, exercise where you're having to try and give the person that you're talking to what they need without knowing what they need. So sometimes I'd feel like I was really disappointing people because I'd be feeling kind of, you know, I'd be chatting and capable, and you could see that they really wanted me to be a mess on the floor so that they could just like pat me on the head or, be my rescuer, and I wasn't in that state. And then other days when I was a complete puddle on the floor, you'd see people thinking, oh, I just thought we could come and have a sort of jolly chat and pretend it hadn't happened, and I don't really know how to cope with this sort of crying mess. And so you're constantly feeling like you're letting people down because and then there's also people, you know, this wasn't really me so much, but this happens a lot, and I keep forgetting to mention it because it's not just about how I respond. Other people have different responses. There's also those that just feel completely numb and don't feel anything, and they feel they feel so guilty that they're not feeling anything. And that's, you know, the shock, and it might be 20 years on when it hits you. You know, we do all respond differently, and I think particularly for those
and that can be kind of crippling, can't it? That feeling,
yeah. So all bets are off, really. You know, you just be with where you are today and know that that's okay.
We've had a comment here saying, someone saying exactly, thanks for highlighting that grief is an individual thing. Sometimes people have weird expectations of what grieving should be, but that's being prescriptive and it's not right. Some cultures really pressurize the bereaved on how they grieve. This has been helpful. So thank you. And I'm glad, Emma, I'm really glad that was helpful for you. And I'm just going to come back to Sasha in just a minute. I'm going to tell people what is coming up. I cannot access, it's my fault for my connection, nothing to do with the Goldster website. I cannot access all the new things that are coming up with PPG. We have 3 other presenters, the brilliant Rosie Stancer, the explorer, Alistair Hignall, sportsman, and of course, Humphrey Hawksley, who those of you who do book club know, BBC correspondent, thriller writer, not my husband, by the way, just a same surname, very distant cousins, for those of you who think that we're married, we're not. But we've got lots of really great things coming up. My next PPG is on the 10th of May, and that is going to be with a friend of mine, campaigner called Sarah Hope, who has set up the most extraordinary charity called Elizabeth's Legacy of Hope in memory of her mother, which helps provide prosthetic limbs for amputee, mostly children, all over the world. And has also recently, with Transport for London, set up a much needed helpline for anybody who has suffered kind of tragic loss or permanent disfiguration or conditions after an accident on Transport for London's network, because that's what she needed and it wasn't there. I also want to let you know what's coming up on the book club. For those of you who haven't been to book club before, I do hope that you'll come and join me and Humphrey. One of us is always there on a Thursday or a Friday lunchtime. I'm actually there this Thursday, very excitedly, with one of my childhood icons, Nigel Planer, the actor best known as being in the comic strip Presents and as Neil the hippie in The Young Ones, who's also an excellent playwright. And he's writing a novel at the moment called Jeremiah Born in Time. So I hope you'll join me for that on Thursday at 12 o'clock. And then on Friday, Humphrey is going to be talking to the fabulous American author, Austin S. Camacho. And I will apologize to anyone who was trying to click onto the Goldster website and was having a problem getting through to that. That is because he has an S, a middle initial with a full stop next to it, and the website people did not like it. So I apologize if you were trying to see it. It's all fixed now. It's, as Humphrey said, from the heart of Washington, D.C. He's going to bring you his own private eye stories about the detective called Hannibal Jones. And then the following week, Humphrey is talking to the food writer. I've got to find her name here. Norman Musa, about a book called Amazing Malaysia. And I will be talking to Lisa Edwards on the 22nd, who has published a book called Cheat, Play, Live. She's obviously referenced that very famous book about how you can change your life. So a really fascinating story of how she went from being a publishing executive to being on the other side of the fence. And we're going to talk to her about that journey of what it's like to be on both sides. And for those of you who are going to be attending Book of the Month, that's always the last Friday of the month. This month's read is Candide by Voltaire, and that is with Humphrey. And then next month, the end of May, you'll be with me, and we're going to be reading Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day by Winifred Watson, both really amazing books. So back to Sasha. Thank you so much for today, Sasha. I wanted you to tell us about how you set up this memorial for Bill. Just tell us about how you did that and what it is, because I think people would love to hear.
Yeah, well, I think memorializing is another really important way of navigating your grief, keeping your loved one's name alive in any way you can. And, for some people that might be, planting something in your garden or your window box. It might be doing a bench. It might be raising money for charity, doing sponsored runs, walks, whatever. What I decided to do, and I really get that this is not going to be possible for most people, but because of Bill's love of theatre, I actually decided to do a bursary in his name, a year-long bursary for somebody with theatrical talent who wouldn't otherwise have got a chance to produce, direct, star in, write, whatever they want to do, a play for the stage. So I went into partnership with the Lyric Theatre in Hammersmith, and we have devised something that is about to go into its 3rd year, would be 4th if it wasn't for COVID, but called the Bill Cashmore Award. And what we do is every year, we've just had like I say, the second one was incredibly, well, the fact that both been successful, we've just had the second one. We choose a person or a partnership to develop an idea for a play. They have to be between 18 and 25. They have to live or work in West London. They present us with a 10-minute idea for a play that they want to make that speaks to their world, the world of the under 25s, the sort of things that they want to talk about and that wouldn't possibly otherwise get a platform or a voice. And then over the course of the year, we give them resources, we give them mentoring, we give them some money, we give them access to lighting, set, props, marketing, everything that the Lyric has to offer. And we produce at the end of it a play which goes on for 4 nights at the studio stage, and it basically headlines what the Lyric does every year. It's called the Evolution Festival. So not only do they have this whole year to produce and direct and be in, if they want to be in it, and write a play, and they have all that year's worth of learning of how a theatre works. At the end of it, they have this calling card, and we invite casting directors and West End producers and loads of people from the theatrical profession to come and see the show. And it's, people can buy tickets as well. It's open to the public. And then we try and help them go on tour with it if it has a shelf life afterwards. And it's been completely fabulous. And both of our previous winners are now planning tours, and they are developing their plays further. And it's been a fantastic experience. And we've just chosen the 2 women who want to make next year's play, which will be on in the Lyric Hammersmith next March. And yeah, we've now got a year to help them make that be a reality. So yeah, that's been a fabulous thing for me to do, and to keep Bill's name out there.
And the book, Languages of Loss, you have a quotation on the front from Hugh Bonneville. You've got a foreword written by Tamsin Greig, because they were friends of Bill's, is that right? Yeah, so the whole community is involved in that.
Yeah, which, like I say, I realise that I sometimes sort of feel a bit guilty when I talk about memorialising when I've done something that's sort of quite big and starry, when it's that's not going to be available to everybody. But Bill, he was in Cambridge Footlights. He knew Hugh and others from that time. He was in a play with Tamsin Greig when they were both in their 20s. So he knows a lot of people from the theatrical world, and I was able to call on some really lovely friends to help me set this up. So yeah, I feel very, very blessed and fortunate that I have some, contacts in that world that have enabled me to do something in his name. But it's also
helping other people. This is
amazing. And it's helping other people.
People whose careers begin because of that, which is wonderful.
Absolutely. Have I got time to tell you a quick story, or not really?
3 minutes, so yes.
Okay, very, very quickly. Just before Bill died, he had, the year before, he had gone down, he was working 4 days a week in his business so that he could devote a Friday to getting more back into writing plays and doing another one-man show. So he was hoping to, sort of ease himself into retirement at 56 with doing more in the theatrical world. And he was booked to do his one-man show at the Finborough Theatre. It was meant to be the 3 weeks after he died. And in preparation, he'd booked himself on a sort of refresher acting course at Equity were running. The last minute, they changed the date. They said, we'll give you he couldn't do the date that they changed this course to. They said, we'll give you a refund. And he said, don't give me a refund. Offer my place to somebody who otherwise couldn't afford to do it. So he always wanted to help people get a foot on the ladder. This happened literally 2 or 3 weeks before he died, so this was on my mind. And when I gave his eulogy at his funeral, I said this, I believe this happened for a reason. I believe that this was like a message of Bill saying, this is what I want you to do. I want you to give people a foot on the ladder. I want you to give them a chance. So it is, but it's not for people who've been to drama school. It's not for people that have got another means to get into the theatre. It's not for people that would make it anyway. It's for people that otherwise wouldn't have a chance. So I feel like the whole thing was his idea. But so when I gave his eulogy, I said, look, I've got this idea. This happened. I want to make this. I've got this idea to make something happen. So a lot of people in who were at his funeral, like Hugh and Tam, said, yeah, we're in, what can we do to help? So so I sort of feel like it was Bill's idea really, and I'm just kind of putting it into practice.
It's amazing you were together enough at the eulogy. I'm so impressed with that. Wow, to actually think of that and come up with something so positive. Gosh, so tell us, you mentioned yoga very briefly, and I actually would like you to come back on, not at PPG, onto the book club later in the year. Just show us the cover of your,
yes,
of your book.
I have. So my third book, which comes out on June the 9th, is no longer about grief. It's called Yoga Saved My Life, and it is about, it's not really a yoga book, don't worry, it's not telling you how to do yoga. It's about the parallel between yoga and psychotherapy. I'm also a yoga teacher, and I have felt always that there are so many parallels between my two professions really. Yoga is fantastic. Trying to do physically what therapy is trying to do is help us do emotionally, which is basically to go inwards, to get to know ourselves better, to develop more self-awareness, more self-compassion, more self-regulation, more tools to understand ourselves and know how to manage the strong emotions. So that's kind of what it's about, but I would love to come on and talk about it more.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, we will get a date for you to come on later this year. Thank you so much, Sasha. You've been fantastic. For anybody who wants to find her books, they are Languages of Loss and A Grief Companion, and just
Yoga Saved My Life.
and Yoga Saved My Life, yeah. And look on the PPG page and you will find all the information about Sasha. Thank you, everybody. Sasha and I are going to turn off our videos now, and Stephanie or Ben, I'm not sure who, will put up a poll. I hope to see many of you on Thursday. Take care, everybody. And thank you. You've had a thank you, Sasha and Lucinda from Sonia. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.